Hi, I'm Gordon Lamphere, and welcome to the Real Finds podcast, where we have real conversations with key entrepreneurs, activists, and researchers who are shaping the real estate industry and, as a result, our world. On today's podcast, we'll be speaking with Hunter Kosar. Hunter is owner and president of Twisted Nail Sand and Gravel, one of Texas's fastest growing truck brokerage service companies. On the podcast, we discuss his path from investment banking to trucking and construction. In our conversation, we take a deep dive into the state of the logistics industry, the most common pitfalls that are crushing profitable real estate developments, and why Hunter thinks the trucking industry is overdue for a shakeup. If you're a developer, broker, or in the logistics industry, today's podcast is well worth a listen. Hunter, thanks for hopping on the podcast today.
Absolutely happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So what got you into trucking? Because I know you were in investment banking and you had all sorts of background that's a non-traditional logistics background. So what got you into the trucking industry?
Yeah, the trucking journey was a little bit interesting. I went to a lot of school to end up essentially buying a semi, which I could have done out of high school. But part of it is circumstance. I grew up in a family that is very heavily construction related, so it's what I was around. And I've always felt that my entrepreneurial journey was going to need to leverage the people that are around me and the resources that are around me more so than just inventing something new or doing something new. And so when I got into my first job out of school, my job was to value these businesses that were looking to sell. And in doing so, not many of my peers were very interested in the construction markets, but I was. And so I accepted any trucking company that came through, all of them. And I got to interview the owners and find out what worked well, what didn't work well, what did they wish they had done differently. And at the same time, I was traveling back and forth to Waco. I was working up in Dallas, so about an hour and a half. And my stepfather, who was a trucker, he had all these papers all over his desk, and he was trying to figure out if he had made money or not. And I just couldn't believe that the industry norm was just to accept a run and then hope that it made money, that you didn't actually do the math to figure out. And so I gathered 6 months of his receipts and I itemized them. I turned them into an income statement, and I made a little calculator for him to be able to bid his work. And in that process, I saw that there was a little bit of margin. I had been working in Dallas on these companies. And so I thought, well, it's not a big deal to buy one truck. So let's just do it. So I bought one truck and I hired a driver and I kept my job in Dallas. And I grew that up to about six before I was voluntold that a decision needed to be made. And then I transferred into being in the trucking full time. So my journey was not expected, and it was more just an opportunity that I saw in front of me. And I threw a little bit of resource at it and time and decided to try to make it something.
And where did you really see that opportunity?
I like to see areas of the market where I can bring something that the rest of the market isn't bringing at the time. And so I saw a lot of opportunity in what is still an industry that has a very poor reputation and being a broker. In this particular part of the industry, it's just a dog eat dog world. You're surrounded by sharks, and my family being the people that were being employed by these sharks, I thought there just has to be a better way than what they're offering you. And if not, then what they're offering seems pretty easy. And so I'd say that was mainly the opportunity that I saw, was that these people who were powering the industry, that were literally delivering the material. Without them, you couldn't deliver it. We're just not being treated very fairly. They weren't, brokers would tell them one thing and then do the complete opposite. So I said, if it's that easy, I just tell you what I'm going to do and then I do it. That's easy enough. I have a skill set that I don't imagine a lot of people in aggregate hauling have, in that I am very educated in finance, in banking, in these resources that are necessary to be able to facilitate these large contracts. So in the beginning, while those were not that big of advantages, it was mostly effort. It was mostly, are you willing to put in the amount of work required to get up under this truck and repair it in the middle of the Texas heat? I knew that long term, if I stuck with it, I would eventually get to a place where the things that I have been training in my education, in my upbringing, would allow me to shine. And so that has fortunately been the case where a lot of our strategic advantage has been in either in my negotiation, in the way that I present myself in front of the customers or the banks, in my ability to assemble banks to lend to an idea that is not necessarily one that is just plug and play into their models. So
So, can you dive a little bit more? I know you mentioned driver aggregation, kind of why that matters in the trucking industry and the power of kind of trucking networks.
sure. The trucking industry is very fragmented, and when you have a fragmented industry, you have just an intense amount of competition, and not in the favor of the individual operators. Usually, in the favor of the larger companies that are hiring these individuals. When you're trying to negotiate, a lot of negotiation is just leverage. Do I have the ability to walk away from this deal? And if not, then we're not really negotiating. And so, my theory, which has proven to be somewhat true, is that if we all just stopped beating each other up on these rates, if I stopped treating you as a competitor and more as a resource that's available to me, then maybe I could unify us. And if you trust me as a voice to negotiate for you, then I can get you a much better deal than what you would have gotten on your own, both for the customer, because they don't have to deal with 15 different individual providers for one service. They just have to deal with me. And for the provider of the service, they don't have to take a contract that was just put in front of them and they have to accept whether it's profitable or not. They have somebody on their side that is doing the math, that's coming up with this is what this run should actually bid, that is making sure that their company is operating above board and as one unit. And so when I go and negotiate, I'm not negotiating with 5 trucks. I'm negotiating with the power of 50 trucks or 60 trucks. I'm negotiating as one of the largest players in the market, but I have no trucks myself anymore. And so that's, I would say that that assembly, the reason why it's important is specifically for that. If you have 50 people telling you no, it's a lot harder to tell that person that they're wrong versus if you just have one person telling you no, because then you just go to the next person on the list. So I've seen a good bit of success in. I tell the truckers, I say I'm trying to unionize y'all without being a union. That's what a union at its core takes all these individuals with common wants and desires and needs, and to make sure that they have one unified voice, that they're standing together. They're not at each other's throats saying, oh, okay, well, I'll take $1 less to be on that. That we're all saying no. We're all hurting. If that means we're all sitting because we know that that material does not move without us in the equation. And so it's a concept that makes a lot of sense on paper. It's very hard to get people to buy into it because the real world application of that, much like what the market is right now, these are real people with real bills that really have to put food on the table. And so it's a sensitive spot. Being in the brokerage industry, being in the middle, because you have to weather all forms and all seasons of what your both sides of your customers are willing to bear. A good example being right now, quite a few of these trucks, even though they do appreciate negotiating as individuals, just where the economy is at right now, they've had a very long winter. In our specific part of the market, it's been very rainy. A lot of operators are getting quite desperate. And so you start to see that the unionization of these trucks dissipate as their requirements become more and more immediate. And so I tend to fit well with both sides of the market, but our volume does drop significantly whenever we have to convince a truck, no, I know that you have consistent work over there. Well, why don't you take this much higher paying work for a better working condition over here? Well, when you're worried about where your next meal comes from, if you can make your next truck payment, it doesn't matter what the individual day does. It matters, can I keep myself booked for a long term? The rest of the market can figure it out for themselves. And so it's a give. I guess there's a positive and a negative to both sides of bringing that group voice together. But overall, it's tremendously positive. The impact that we've had on trucks that do stay with us, that are with us, they're operating at living wages. They're able to not only improve the equipment they have, they're able to add equipment to their fleets. So long term, I'm very, very, very convinced that if you're an operator in the industry, your voice needs to be a part of a bigger voice. You, as an individual, it becomes very difficult to stand on your own 2 feet and make your presence known when your competition is 10, 15, 20 times larger than you are and has that much more resources available to them.
So I know you mentioned a number of market dynamics, and I'm curious, kind of, uh, is there a product that you focus on primarily in the market?
Most of what we focus on is the delivery or the sourcing of regional aggregates that go into large scale commercial projects or even your local driveway. Uh, there's a lot of value in dirt and a lot of unknown value in dirt. You can really bankrupt a project by not estimating your dirt correctly. A lot of it's tied up in the logistics of that dirt. So the service that we're offering is not necessarily a tangible. It's where you come to me as my customer and you have a list, you have a buyer, a general contractor will have a purchaser on their team that's given a list of who knows how many items that they have to go find. The value that I provide in that transaction is your purchaser contacts me and then within 1 day has a response for every item that they need sourced from the most efficient location because I'm partnered at every vendor in the area. I mean, maybe there's one or two that I don't know of, but by and large, whereas you may know 15 people in the market, I know 100 people in the market. So your source that you find on your own may be 40 miles away from your project and have good material. But my source is 15 miles from your project and has better material, but doesn't have a website. They're not going to sell to you because they don't know you. It's a mom and pop shop. They've known me for 10 years. My checks have always been good. And so I find that my service that I'm offering is more about how smooth can I make this transaction for my three customers. I have a supplier, but they're really a customer, right? Because the better that I do at that supplier that produces that aggregate, the more that they refer me their clients, the more that they hire my trucks to deliver on their orders, the more customers that I can pick up through that network. From the customer side, that's more self explanatory. Of course, that's a customer. But from our trucker side, they're also our customer, where we're trying to develop a service that makes sense for them because their alternative is to just not use us and not pay a commission to work with us. So we're in a unique position being in the middle where we're not actually producing anything other than efficiency. Is it better for us on average to work with Twisted Nail and not have to worry about where we're getting this material from? Not have to worry about, well, that truck broke down. Where am I going to find another one? We have 400 trucks. We can just pull it back up. Whether that quarry that produces that very very specific rock and it ran out, how am I had to go 70 miles to find that rock. Where can I find the next rock? Well, we know, and we know beforehand because the quarry operates with us. They call us and they tell us we're running out of material. You need to find another supplier. We elevate every touch point in the transaction just because of how informative we are, because of how much our customers and our vendors trust us within the transaction. We add a level of transparency that, in our opinion, and in many of our customers' opinion, is worth paying a premium for.
So you mentioned customers. Who primarily is your customer for dirt and rocks in aggregate?
It'd be general contractors and subcontractors for large scale commercial projects. To give you some examples of some projects that we've done here in Waco, we've done the Baylor basketball stadium, we've done multiple hospital demolitions, we've done various highway interchanges, lakes. We've sourced aggregates for housing development, solar farms, wind farms. Just about, at least in Texas, just about any project you do, you have to export the bad material, which we do, and then import good material. And so it could be anything from just a singular house to a 10,000 house subdivision. That customer will be able to contact us and have all of their aggregate needs not only met, but met in a way that exceeds anything that an individual supplier could do.
And you mentioned some of your sellers. Who are your sellers? I know you mentioned that it's very fractured and it's a lot of mom and pops, but like,
It can be.
is that kind of your primary selling demographic?
I would say our primary selling demographic is anybody that sells rock, dirt, sand, gravel. If you accept haul off, I have a database of anybody that produces rock of any quality, of any kind. I go ahead and log it in my database. And I do that because I don't know what the next customer's requirements are going to be. So our vendors or anybody that produces any type of, it could be your backyard and you sell your topsoil out of it, I'd put you in our database because I never know if your neighbor 2 weeks from now is going to need topsoil and you're the best supplier for it. And so, mostly quarries, mines, but we do sometimes have some ranchers who will accept haul off and disposal of rubble and rock. Most of those are industry connections, though. It's not something where that ranch is always accepting it. It turns out that a trucker who knows somebody knows a rancher. So I'd say 98% of what we do happens at a quarry. It just may not be a publicly known quarry. It may be one that only sells to people that they know. And that varies. It
So
could go as
I
it
know
could
you meant,
sorry, it could go up as high
yeah,
as
go ahead. Yeah.
they're huge companies that a lot of the strategy in the aggregate supply is once you get to a certain size, the only way to grow because it's a quarry, it's in the ground. You can't just pick it up and move it. The ground is where it is. So the only way to grow in your market area is to purchase a or start a new quarry. Well, when you're a Knife River or a Weber or somebody that's huge, you're not trying to start from scratch. You're ready to go right now. And so what I see in the market is you tend to have these mom and pop operators who will operate for a handful of years. And if they see some success, then they tend to draw interest from the Martin Mariettas of the world, who are ready mix producers, ready mix suppliers, asphalt producers, and then they will purchase that quarry to strengthen their internal vertical supply chain. They're not purchasing it necessarily to get the benefit of selling to the public, though they will. They're mostly purchasing it solely to fund their needs or to fuel their needs for their internal production.
So talking about fuel, one of the fuels for your growth has been seeing opportunity, and a lot of that's come from challenges in the industry. I'm curious, where do you see the challenges right now in the industry that are causing some of the opportunity for new brokers or new businesses coming in?
So right now, I think we're not necessarily in a season of opportunity for a new operator. Right now, we're in. I think the industry is in a bit of a survival mode, and the operators that have been very efficient, that have saved and haven't necessarily grown at an exponential rate, I think the opportunity is with those operators right now because of how unstable the construction market feels. Now, we're still in the beginning phases of figuring out what the heck is going on. Our operating range is typically, I tell our carriers, January to February, 10%. That's how if we would have run a million, we're going to run 100,000 in these 2 months. That tends to kick up in the next month, 30, 50, 70, until right about now, we should be running wide open. And that typically means around 60 to 70 trucks are on the road for Twisted Nail delivering to commercial projects. This year, in the winter part of the year, through March, we bid so many large projects. I mean, more than we bid more in those 3 months than we have ever even bid in any single year that has come before that. And so we felt like in the beginning of the year, this is about to be a really, really busy year. But as the year has progressed, it especially surrounding the tariff conversation, which doesn't, when you're talking about grabbing local dirt and moving it to a local project, you wouldn't assume that the larger economy, that the tariff conversation would have an impact. But when you pause and think about it, the customers that are building these projects, let's use a solar farm, for example. I don't know the specific numbers, but I know that solar and alternative energy has been hit with a significant tariff burden. Well, if you're an owner about to put in 1,000-acre solar farm, and it turns out that the inputs that you're going to be using in 1 year have just increased in price 100%, you're probably going to pause your project. And so our best estimate of what's happening in the market is that these operators who have, I mean, these projects are tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. It's nothing for them to just pause for 6 months and say, well, let's just see what's happening. And that typically happens whenever there's an administration change, regardless of party. In construction in Texas, if there's an election, it is going to slow down while everybody feels out what's about to happen, what changes are coming through. This time, it feels a bit different. We're very prepared. and we're very lean. So while we're comfortable, we are seeing the conversations happening in the market, and they're not comfortable conversations. These truckers are in they're in a situation, and we don't know how long it's going to last, and we don't know how bad it could get. But I do know that the market has cooled off significantly. What we anticipate is that those projects are just going to be kicked into the fall, and then we're going to have a tremendous balloon at some point. That's an area where we thrive. If there is a shortage in the market, we are excellent in that area, because that means that there's so much demand that we can offer the trucks a rate that they would normally not get, which means that our customers are getting the supply that they normally would not have access to. Because if every project for the next 6 months kicks off in October, there is going to be an extreme shortage of trucks. Not only because those projects delayed, but in the interim, the market has been bad. So operators, companies that have not operated lean, that have not tried to operate with some fiscal responsibility, they're steadily going to go out of the market. They're steadily going to go out of business, and that further restricts supply. And so we tend to ride the wave of supply and demand. Right now, there's not very much demand. There's a significant amount of supply. As temperatures come and normalize, in the last 2 months, I think we've had more rain than any period in the last 10 years. The last time I looked at it, and rain really disrupts what we're doing. So right now, we don't have an answer. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 3 months. We expect that things are going to be significantly slower than previous years, but are going to be fine for us. And then in the fall, we expect, or in the early 2026, we expect these projects that have been postponed and delayed, especially if there is a walk back on tariffs, to start firing right back up, to keep popping off. And if so, then especially with the gap that's created as a lot of these operators drop off, it's going to be a very, very busy, and I guess on the general contractor side, the subcontractor side, a very expensive fall to get the material imported in. It's not even just on my side. It's not the quarries, as an example, especially as we were going through 2020 and the supply shocks that came through that. Everybody realized that the pricing on this material is not, it's very elastic. The customers are not price sensitive. And if you can take a material that you sell for $5 and then sell it for $8, that is a huge change. That is a massive change for a quarry, and they did it. They not just one quarry. As a whole, the market was able to raise their prices like that, both on the material side and on the trucking supply side. And so I suspect if we continue to go through these waves, that we're going to continue to see the market try to test this price elasticity to see if it's a really static industry, or if there is more wiggle room to come up. We've seen that earlier this year, where at the beginning of the year, you see those price rollouts start to come through. Towards the end of the year, they announce them for the beginning of the year. And we've already started getting notices that say you can expect this to happen again in 2026. I wish I had a more clear answer, but to be honest, the market is in a very murky spot right now, and we're trying to figure it out ourselves.
Yeah, I would say for us and for our market on both the office industrial and land sales has been markedly slower after Liberation Day, and there's been a real shift in the market, particularly for any parcel that's larger than probably a million and a half square or $1.5 million, or any building that's more than $2 million. We've seen a real curtailing in the market. Some of the small stuff is still happening, but for large projects, it's definitely been a very similar experience on our end. I'm curious, one of the experiences that I had when I looked into you and some of your content is I think you give unique insight into kind of just generally the construction industry and some of the disconnects that happen. And I know, as somebody who deals with a lot of construction and logistics related businesses, I certainly know more than your average Joe, but I'm curious, where do you see some of the largest challenges going forward and disconnects in the industry? And kind of how does that play out to potential opportunity for businesses that are coming in and maybe disrupting parts of the construction and logistics related industry?
I think it depends on where the market heads. If we continue to stay in a rather uncertain time like we are right now, then the operators that excel and the opportunities that are going to be there are for people who push hard on efficiency. These are conversations that I've had internally with my team, where we may be looking at another operator who has 3 projects going and we just have one. But we don't know what if they're inefficient. Their minimum may be to keep 90 trucks on the road, and my minimum may be to keep 20 trucks on the road. Right. But that's because I spent 10 years trying to craft the most efficient team I can to change every process. So that 1 unit of effort for me may be 4 units of effort for my competition. I think that in really turbulent times, the operators that put an emphasis on software, that put an emphasis on fuel efficiency, route efficiency, that take every load seriously. I think that in good times, the mentality tends to be, well, if I show up at 7:30 and leave at 3:30, I still get 5 loads instead of 6. Well, the people that go and try to grab that 6, knowing that there may not be a job tomorrow for me to get 5 on, those are the people that will see success. I think that we've built a great culture internally of that, of really pushing our processes, of having our people challenge the way that we do things. Even this week, we've been having conversations about how can we get our quoting process more efficient so that the turnaround time doesn't eat up our salesperson's time. They're able to just get quick driveway quotes out. That seems trivial when you look at our revenue and then compare that to a $600 driveway, but it's attacking the problem, which is inefficiency. And I think that, particularly in construction, a lot of the construction industry is just, I don't know, I'm just going to do it and then hope at the end that I made money doing it. Even the beginning story that I told you about my stepfather, he didn't know. He didn't know what the answer was. He's just in good faith moving forward. That's a really dangerous mentality to have in this particular season. So I really think the advantage and the opportunity and the things that I'm putting not only my time but my money into are how can I make this company right here still profitable and be tiny and be just the smallest company you could imagine because we have no clue what the work volume is going to be. I've never been in an economy, for example, where not to suggest that one thing or the other is going to happen, but a global war happens. What happens? I've never lived through that. I have no concept of how that would shut down the commercial construction market. Do the states pull back their budget? A lot of our work comes from TxDOT. Would they pause these major contracts? And if so, that leads to an influx of supply. So you don't know the answer. You don't know what's coming around the corner, but the only way that I know to prepare for it is to become efficient, is to make it so that this whole operation can run on 15 trucks. I used to keep 15 trucks busy just by myself. So surely with a team of 6, I can keep 15 busy as well. So that's our goal. That's how we're attacking this uncertainty. We're trying anything and everything we can to just become the most efficient operation we can be. And then beyond that, a lot of it's luck, right? Like I can't make these decisions. I can't change the economy. This is the circumstance that I've been dealt. And so I can assemble the best hand with the best people, and sometimes that's not enough. But I suspect and I hope that it is enough in our case. And it's certainly where I see the opportunity, particularly in a market where it doesn't feel like there's much opportunity right now. I have people call in saying they're about to buy a dump truck. They're swapping from a different category of freight because their instinct says that, well, people need dirt all the time. And I explain the same thing to them. This is probably not a good time to become a new operator here. If you're more familiar and you've done it before, then you understand what to expect. And I can explain to you in terms that you'll understand why this isn't a good opportunity. But a lot of people are desperate and a lot of people make desperate decisions. And so this first season, when we're getting through the first months of difficulty, we feel that where people will go out and they'll severely underbid a project. Well, we're not even going to entertain underbidding the project because that's not our brand. It's not our reputation. It's not what we are in the market. Well, we have to wait for that project to realize that that person can't deliver, then call us back, and then we can come back in at a normalized rate. So I think a lot of that patience, a lot of being in the spot where I can say that and be confident that that's okay for us to have that strategy is because of our efficiency and it's because of how we've handled our cash reserves historically. We stay very well financed. We have a good bit of equity in the company, so it's not something that we're overly. We have a long runway is a good way to say it. So we're able to ride the dips. It's just we don't know if the dip is going to be, is it over in a month, or will we be having this conversation at this same time in 2026? It's impossible to predict, and I think the only thing you can do is make yourself as efficient and as um, valuable to your customer as you can, because they're trying to do the same thing. They're going to be saying, well, I had to convince this contractor to restart this project, that it's a good time. And if I'm running up the budget, they're just going to repause it. So they also have their own concerns, and working with those customers and realizing that they're just communicating what the end money is telling them to us. And how, if we can make the deal work, we do it. If we can't, then it's having the patience to know that we have worked hard to develop the runway so that we can outlast whatever is happening in the broader economy.
Why are people making such large mistakes in bidding out contracts or just in the trucking industry, in the bidding process in general?
I think it's a combination of things. I'm going to speak only to the trucking side of it because it's the side I'm more familiar with, but I'm sure it's the same with most general and subcontractors. You have some operators that operate in good faith, and we did this today. We told somebody we're not a good match for your contract, even though we would love to be a part of that contract. It is better to be a faithful operator and say we're not a great match. There are many people who, like we've alluded to, they need to eat tomorrow and they don't have a contract. And so the only thing as a person that they're going to do is get the contract. And they don't consider the consequences that may fall out if they can't get it done, because the consequences of tomorrow are much more steep to them. And so, in my experience, particularly as these operators are pushed against their backs against the wall and they need to maintain what they've been doing, right? Last year, let's say they earned 1 million, they have to earn at least 1 million this year or they're a failure. That type of mentality. They're going to bid whatever it takes to land the contract and then deal with the consequences later. Well, we've been around this long enough to know that they're not, the customer's not going to call you back. You have failed them in a way that means that when they call me back, they're going to have a price that is more expensive than if they had just gone with me to begin with, because now I'm scrambling. I've already assigned those trucks somewhere else. There's less available to them in the market than if the general contractor had just chosen a reputable operator to begin with. I think the bait for the general contractors and subcontractors is always like, it's the you get what you pay for argument. If you're going to hire the very, very, very cheapest bid, you're going to get on average the very, very cheapest result. And that's not always what's best for your project. We have a lot of projects that they'll take the cheapest bid and they need to import 1,000 tons a day, which is a modest project for us, but maybe a huge project for a competitor of ours. And then that competitor falls short. Well, they fell short because they assumed that the trucks would take $900 a day to deliver the material, and they assumed wrong because the trucks will just not go. There are cases where the trucks will go because they are equally as desperate, and so they made those. I've not been one of those operators, so I'm not sure how the end game plays out for them. They may be able to survive through it, but their reputation, particularly around these premium GCs and subs who would use somebody like me, is totally eviscerated. There's no shot. I mean, they are blacklisted just for missing one type of delivery on one contract. So I think a lot of the missteps are just people assuming that the consequences of tomorrow, of a week from now, are going to be significantly less than the consequences of tomorrow. But it's very short-sighted, and it's short-sighted because they had a short-sighted operating philosophy. Because if they had a long-viewed operating philosophy, they would have saved, they would have kept their capital, they would have prepared for this moment. But they didn't. They grew rapidly, or they added equipment, and I've done that when I first started. I grew way too fast, ran out of money, had to pull from credit cards, was desperate, took any rate. But I learned. I did it one time, and I haven't done it since. And I think that it's really difficult to put blame on an operator and say, oh, they just don't know, or they're not smart enough, or they're not good enough at their job. They could be all of those things and still get desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. And so when I look at the market, the competitors that if you could say I was salty, which I would not classify myself as salty. I'm salty about the people who are clearly bidding something that's never going to work. And so if they had just not bid, I would probably would have got the contract, or somebody that is offering a similar service, and things would have felt a lot smoother. But as these individual operators get more desperate, they say, "Well, I can do it. I can do 1,000 tons with just my one truck." And then they don't realize that the customer needs it in 2 days. They don't think about that because they just see 1,000 tons. I can do that, no problem. And then they submit the bid. The customer selects it because it's a good bid. They don't owe any middleman fees or anything, or they're offering the material at cost instead of charging a premium. Well, then they don't realize that they have to finance that material now for free, for 60 days or however long. If that customer buys $100,000 of material, you're on hold for that until they pay you. And so I think a lack of experience, maybe, but also when you get into an economy like the one we're in, and it's not a situation currently where everything's critical and alarms are going off, but certainly the warning signs are there that things are not smooth for everybody in this market. I think you just get people that have to do something. Those wheels have to turn. That's what I tell the trucks when I'm recruiting them. Hey, I understand that your wheels have to turn. I'm not going to tell you that your truck can only run for me. You need to go be hustling up your own work. You have to find your own thing. I want to be one of your customers. I don't want to be your only customer. Because if I'm your only customer, no matter what I do, you're going to be mad at me because you're not getting the money you think you're worth. You're not getting the amount of work you think your truck deserves. And then those types of operators who, the bank's calling, you have to pay on your truck note. They're going to accept whatever somebody will pay them because zero is not an option for them. The operators like me, who I guess
So,
the equivalent would be that my equipment's paid off, I can just write it out.
so what do you think in general that the public gets the most wrong about the trucking industry?
I would say before being in the trucking, this is not necessarily related to aggregate sales or anything, but before being in the trucking industry, I felt like trucks and semis were unsafe. Like I tried to stay away from them on the roads and the highways. I wouldn't want to drive next to them. After being in the trucking industry, a lot of these drivers have 1 million, 2 million miles of accident-free driving. They may be the best drivers on the road. They may be the most aware people. That's not always the case, but I think that the public at large villainizes truck drivers. And in part, you can see it in the way that I know that there are instances where litigation is required, but I think we can all appreciate how aggressively the trucking industry is pursued if there is an accident, how all encompassing those lawsuits can be, how aggressively they get pursued. And I think that extends more than just in the courtroom. An example that I give is when I had trucks, we would haul rocks, and we would get complaints all the time from the public about these trucks just being slow or just being in the way or whatever the case may be. And likewise, the local law enforcement would get those complaints. Well, there were times where an officer would sit outside my gate, and if a truck left that gate, they would pull that truck over and issue it a citation. We're doing our very best. We're operating above board. We've been audited. We do well in our audits. Like, we are a good operator in the industry, and we are still being run out by the people of our community. Just for contributing and building their homes and the stores they go to. I think there's just such a villain aspect of trucking, contractors as well. I mean, I understand truckers are difficult. I have a career in because truckers are difficult, right? That's my whole job, is because of how difficult they are. But they're good people and they work hard and they want what's best for them. They're not necessarily greedy people. They're not trying to run your job off. They just want to get paid what is fair to them. And I think that a lot of the stigma a lot of that fear that people have over this large machine that's traveling down the highway, you can see that in every interaction that you have with the public. It's not obvious. It's not like they're like shaking when they're next to a truck, but it's the way that they're treating that trucker as if he's not just, or she is not just um, as much a part of this community, as if their home is not 3 miles down the road, right? As if that truck didn't deliver the load that's under the sidewalk, that they're waving their fists at that truck for driving that. So I think by and large, the, I would hope that the public knew a trucker and knew that, hey, my uncle Tom's a trucker and he's a normal guy, because a lot of them are, and a lot of them are rough people. I understand that. but that's all of society. You could go to any industry and there's rough actors and there's good actors and there's everyone in between. But I think by default, people tend to think that if you're a trucker, you must be part of the problem. And often, they're, in my experience, they're very much part of the solution. They're entrepreneurs. How many people go into business by themselves simply by buying a truck and a trailer for 50 grand? You can be your own boss, right? That's tremendous. That's a huge leap of faith for a blue collar family to come together and say, "Hey, you're gonna get rid of your job and you're gonna buy this truck." And I think when that trucker does that, it's a very positive thing. It's a very hopeful thing. They want to contribute to their community in a positive way. Then they get the truck and they realize the customers treat them poorly. The people on the roads treat them poorly. The people that hire them treat them poorly. They're just treated bad all the time. And then we wonder why they come across as gruff people. Well, they come across as gruff people because they catch nothing but heat from law enforcement to just regular citizens. Every step of the way, it feels like that the system is out to get them out of business. And so I think that's what the public gets most wrong about them. These are your neighbors, and they took a risk to buy a truck to help their community, to be a working part of it, to be home with their kids earlier, right? I think all of that just gets missed because they're in this big hunk of metal that's traveling down the highway, and someone's friend of a friend was in an accident once, and so as a result, every truck must be bad.
So we're traveling to the end of the podcast, and one of the ways we like to wrap it up is with our final four. That's four quick questions that give us a little more insight into the industry and a little more insight into you. So the first question that I always like to ask is, what do you think is going to change the most about logistics and trucking over the next 10 years?
10 years is a long window. A lot can happen in 10 years. I'm excited about the potential of self-driving vehicles. I know that the trucks from Dallas are hauling from Dallas to Houston, I think right now with a driver in the passenger seat and the truck's automatically driving. But I don't think that it's going to happen in the next 10 years. I think that the driver aspect of it is really critical. So for me, I think that in the next 10 years, what you're going to see is a lot of the mom and pops, the ones that I was just talking about in the last question, are going to disappear because the emphasis, my industry, I feel like is lagging behind the efficiency standards of other industries. When you look at tech, when you look at banking, when you look at any restaurants, you know, the focus of those are, okay, we have a working model. How can we make it as efficient as possible and then copy and paste it? Well, in trucking, that is just now starting to feel like the rest of the industry is catching on to that. Now, van freight, flatbed freight, that's totally different. They have been in technology for a long time, but in aggregate hauling specifically, in quarry hauling, in quarry production specifically, they, for whatever reason, haven't modernized themselves. They haven't even got websites. They're not online. They're not aggregated that way. And so I think in the next 10 years, you're going to see a rise in operators like me who insist that that happen. You can keep doing whatever you're going to do, but I'm going to do it for you. And you don't even know it's happening. And so I think that in the next 10 years, you're going to see less of an opportunity as a mom and pop. Let me just buy a truck, get into trucking, than you did in the 10 years prior. I think it's going to slowly fade away, and it's going to be more and more large operators, even in regional markets.
So, one of the other things that we always like to talk about on the podcast is, I know we've taken a step forward to the future. Now let's take a step back. So, one of the things that I always find fascinating about bringing interesting, successful people on is that they have unique insight into uh, how to start your career. And we have a lot of younger people who listen to this podcast. I'd say anyone under 30, I would put uh, into that picture. And I'm curious, if you could give yourself some advice, maybe when you were 22, what would it be?
It's a good time. I started the business around 21, 22, and I'd give myself a lot of advice, to be honest. I would give myself so much advice. And in a way, I'm glad I can't, because if I could give myself advice, I wouldn't have done it. I would have said, I would have come up with a million reasons why I didn't want to be under a truck, sleeping 12 hours in 5 days to just keep these trucks running and keep my full time job and just busting it. But it was worth it. And in hindsight, if I, it's so much effort and it's so hard. But now the job's not that I have now is not easy, but it's the job I wanted. It's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be at the top end of these negotiations. I knew that as an individual, I didn't have the negotiating power. I wasn't in the place that I wanted to be where I could leverage my skill set. So I think that it's kind of a catch 22. If I could give myself advice at 22, actually, I think I would have ended up convincing myself not to do it in that ignorance that I had, that I thought anything is possible. I can do this. Everybody that tells me I can't, they're wrong. They don't know me. I'm going to do it. That mentality is me to a fault. And because of that, I found success because I was more stubborn than a very, very stubborn industry. I was able to eke out a little bit of success over the last 10 years and find my foothold here. So I would not, I don't know that I'd offer myself advice more than encouragement. I would say if you keep going, if you keep working like this, you're going to make it. You're going to end up, you don't know as your lifelong career if you're going to make it, right? But what you have envisioned, what you have created and put in this pitch deck to put in front of your first investor, that is a possibility. It can be a reality if you keep it up. But just every aspect in between is going to be miserable, but when you get there, you're going to look back and say it was worth it. So that would be the advice I would
Like,
give.
yeah, yeah, there's a tremendous power in ignorant faith. Ignorant faith, and that something's gonna go right. I know for me, there are a lot of projects that I would have never started if I knew how much work they were. But now looking back, they're deeply meaningful. One of the things that we like to find meaning in is books, and I'm curious if you have a book that you would recommend to anybody listening.
So I am so bad at titles and names. Like I can't even hardly name songs and things. But I tend to focus my reading, particularly these days, on anything that addresses the problem I'm currently facing. And so the E Myth is the last book that I read, and its core concept is, okay, you have an idea and you're working in your business as the cashier or the manager, but how can you get to that next level? What do people do that remove them from that business, so they're working on that business, on those processes? How can you make this an easily replicatable business so you can do the next thing and the next thing? And it was an interesting, it's something that I've always preached internally, but I haven't necessarily had it in text, so well thought out of, if there's a problem, you either need a person or a process to fix that problem. And this book focuses heavily on the process. It says if you have the process, the person is relatively easy to plug into that process. That's the whole point, is to come up with a process so that if that person leaves or whatever, they can't do the job anymore, you could just plug another person in. So that's been very helpful. I would recommend that book. I do think it was a little long winded to say the point, but its point is very good.
I've heard the same thing about the E-Myth, that uh, some people joke that it is a very long-winded way to go about the process of just implement more
Yeah,
processes.
yeah.
So, in terms of implementing a process, this podcast has been a process to gather great voices, and we find that one of the best ways to gather a great voice on the podcast is to reach out to other voices in the industry and say, "Who the heck should we have on?" So, I'm curious, who's the next person that should hop on the podcast?
If I'm being hopeful for you, I think he'd be such an interesting guest. And he's very involved in the Waco community. He's very involved in the nonprofit scene, and he wants to see young entrepreneurs succeed. His name's Weldon Ratliff. I can't help you get in touch with him, unfortunately. He's a very private person, but he's a very honest and helpful person. I've had to call Weldon twice in my career, and both as far, I mean, I've had to call him multiple times, but I needed to call him twice, and both times he was the sole reason that he got me out of a jam that would have cost me a significant. And he's so knowledgeable. He's honestly, if I could be hopeful, somebody that in future years looks upon me and lets me learn from him in some ways. He's big into real estate development. He has a huge project here in Waco on the riverfront, where he is working with investment groups in the city of Waco and private advisory councils to develop a 521 acre multi. It has a marina, it has shops, it has houses. I mean, it's a huge, huge development for the city. If I could shoot for the moon, that's who I would advise you get. If I could shoot for somebody more realistic, I would say one of my favorite people in Waco is named Thomas Arnold. Thomas is everything that I just said about Weldon, but he is involved in it. Like, he's very approachable. He's somebody you can find very easily. He's open to talking to you, and he owns a crushed concrete production business. So you've talked to the supply side, right? You want to talk to one of my vendors. Thomas is such a deep well of knowledge in construction markets, how those markets are moving, how people feel in this market. If I ever am frazzled and I don't know what's going on, Thomas is my first call. In fact, Thomas is such my first call that he's the one that connects me to Weldon and these people who have an elevated experience in my industry. So Thomas Arnold is somebody that I could easily connect you with. And Thomas as well, he would be better suited to connect you with my home run suggestion, which would be Weldon. I think both of those would be great content for your listeners.
Well, we'll try to reach out to both, but if somebody wants to reach out to you, what's the best way to get in contact?
LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. Hunter Kosar, Kosar. Twisted Nail is a brand that's somewhat easy to find online. You can reach out to the website as well. Feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn, and I check it. We all get a lot of spam on LinkedIn, so I may be slow on it.
We do. I'd like to.
Yeah, but it's a useful. I've reached out to many of my customers, and the first contact comes from reaching out to somebody that is employed there on LinkedIn who gives me the contact that I need to get in at that customer. So I would advise LinkedIn is a great way to do it. And if we get a conversation going, I have no problem sending my contact information and talking to people as well.
Hunter, thank you so very much. And we have to have you on in the future.
Yeah, it's been fun. I really appreciate you having me.
Thanks again to Hunter. We appreciate his insights. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please give us a like, a 5-star rating, and a review. Your comments, interactions, and subscriptions truly matter and help us continue to provide quality guests. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Gordon Lamphere of the Real Finds Podcast. Thank you for listening.